You're listening to Women's Cricket Chat with
Hannah,
and Alex. This episode is brought to you by Black Rat Cricket.
remember if you quote Women's Cricket Chat, you can get 15% off your teamwear.
Coming up on our 6th episode for International Women's Week, we've got head of the 100 competition, Beth Barrett-Wild. Now, Beth talks all things the 100 and the fact that the 100 is going to make history by being the first competition to open with a women's match between the Oval Invincibles and the Manchester Originals. Beth also talks about her life growing up and that cricket has always been a part of her, but that opportunities to play cricket may not have always been visible. And despite women's cricket being on the up, she believes that there is more to be done to make women's cricket more recognisable.
So the theme for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. So we'd like to ask you, I guess the first question is obviously, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
So International Women's Day, I mean, I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently. I think we've been doing lots of planning as an organisation ahead of the big day next week and deciding how we want to celebrate it. So I've kind of done a bit of thinking about what it really means to me and sort of the origins of it. And I did actually do a quick Google about sort of where it came from. And I think that returned the search that it's all about a celebration of the movement of women's rights. And I think that is still very much the case today. I think what I love about it though, and I was talking to my wife Eliza about this last night actually, like I just love how the whole day, like my social media feed is just full of like brilliant, inspiring stories about women doing brilliant things. And I just absolutely love to see that. And I think, you know, having that moment where across the whole world everybody's doing the same thing and is sharing that content, there's something really powerful about that, and I think that's great. I think on the flip side of it, I think, you know, it still serves a really key purpose alongside that celebratory look and feel to it, that it does help us to highlight that we've still got a long way to go. So there's still actually a lot of challenges that still exist, which is where I think the theme for this year around Choose to Challenge fits really nicely, because I think, you know, we have come a long way, and I think cricket in particular, in terms of the journey that we're on with the women and girls game at the moment, we've come a very long way, and a lot of that progress has been made in a very short space of time over the last few years, but we know we still have a long way to go. So I think International Women's Day is one of those moments where it allows you to celebrate all the brilliant stuff that is happening, but it also allows you to take a step back and be like, right, well, where are the gaps? What still have we got to do? And really reflect on that. And I think the other thing, I was almost like thinking about it a little bit from a personal perspective, and given my role as head of the 100 women's competition at the ECB, is, and this is going to sound really cheesy, but in a way, like for me, every day is a little bit like International Women's Day, because I wake up every morning thinking about change and thinking about how I can make a difference, and really kind of thinking about ways that we can make cricket more gender balanced and what are the challenges that we still need to meet and address. So yeah, I think there's lots of levels and layers to it. And I think, you know, I'm very much looking forward to it next week. But that's a good point as well, actually. That was a slip of the tongue and not intentional. But the other point that I did just want to sort of just mention on the whole International Women's Day thing is, and the bit that frustrates me about it is when you do sometimes see organisations and people feel like they have to do something, and it feels a little bit tick boxy, and you're just a bit like, you know, scratch beneath the surface. How will that lead to tangible action and impact, or is it just a company putting out a tweet about how much they value women? Like, how much of it is authentic? So I think there's an element there, and then just the point around, so the slip of the tongue with the year thing, you know, should it be that we have 364 days in between each of those moments where people are thinking about these issues and challenges? Like, it shouldn't be. So that was a really long rambling answer to quite a simple question. Apologies.
You don't have to apologise, because that's what it's all about as well with our podcast. It's not about us, it's about yourself and all the other guests. Like, the more you talk,
I'm very good at talking about myself, so yeah, we're going to get on okay here.
Honestly, it's brilliant, because that's what it's meant to be about. Like, this is your opportunity, and I guess an opportunity for our listeners to hear about you, because obviously your profile within the women's game is huge and you've done so much for it.
That's very kind, Hannah. I think it's an interesting one, isn't it, about sort of my profile within the game. I think it's something actually that I took stock of probably last year. So around the pandemic and everything that happened over the last 12 months, and sort of my role with the 100 and the bitter disappointment that we didn't get to launch that last year, it meant that I did have a bit of time on my hands last summer, which was unexpected. And I think it gave me a chance to really step back and be a bit more proactive with some of that stuff. Like, I realise now that I have got a platform and I have got a voice. And I think historically, if you look at some of the roles that I've done over the years, so I've worked in cricket for a while now, but initially joining the ECB as media manager for the women's team, like, it was all about using the players as the spokespeople, and absolutely, they're brilliant ambassadors for the game, and sort of, they're doing brilliant things. But almost from a personal perspective, I felt like I could and should be doing more. And I think in a way that links back to the whole International Women's Day thing, isn't it? Is how do we use our voice to challenge? How do we use our platform to challenge? So yeah, it's one of those things about sort of as a personal profile. I think I'm increasingly aware of it, and aware of the fact that I'm in a privileged position where I can help to impact and make change happen. But we need to communicate that properly and better. And if I can do that through the odd tweet, so I've got quite into Twitter over the last year. You might have noticed I've become a bit of a prolific tweeter, which is definitely prolific used in a very loose way there, because I think I probably put out 1 or 2 tweets a week, which isn't exactly prolific, but it's a lot more than I was doing. Let's just say that. So I think, I've realised that I do have a role to play in that space, and I have a role to play in sharing some of our ambitions and questioning and challenging what is going on within the sector.
Yeah, definitely, because I was going to come on to this a little bit later, but I think I'll pop this one in and then I'll pass it over to Alex to continue with the questioning. So obviously being seen online as a woman, as a leader, can also sometimes not go in your favour, because people have high opinions all the time, and especially with the 100, there's a lot of kind of resistance to it because it's something new. But how do you deal with the resistance to it and the negativity, because obviously you're kind of like the face of it at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been working on the 100, probably for a couple of years now, which is quite funny in itself, since we haven't actually launched the thing yet. But yeah, you're right. Look, the 100 divides opinion. I think it is under a lot of scrutiny. There are a lot of people out there who are very vocal about how they don't believe it has a role to play, or that they're concerned about the impact it might have on the game. But from my perspective, so my responsibility within the 100 is laser focused on the women's competition and the women's game. And so my ultimate responsibility there is making sure that we use the 100 to really accelerate and turbocharge our plans for the women and girls game. And I think if you take a step back and you look at the 100 sort of holistically, and okay, there might be some things that people don't like about it, if you look at the impact that it could potentially have on women's cricket, it's enormous. So we know we had our schedule announcement last week, and we had the brilliant news that we were able to announce that we're opening the whole competition with a standalone women's match, which is going to be played under lights at the Kia Oval, so the second biggest cricket ground in the country, on Wednesday, the 21st of July, and it's going to have Oval Invincibles women against Manchester Originals women, and that historic first ball in the competition is going to be bowled by one of our brilliant female players. Like, that is game changing. That level of exposure, with that match being live on the BBC, live on Sky Sports, and then every single one of those women's matches after that being live on Sky Sports, and the BBC also picking up additional matches. That level of exposure and visibility and scale is something that we have never seen before in domestic women's cricket, in particular in this country. And I think actually in terms of women's sports, like if you look at what the 100 is doing, it's all about throwing cricket stalls open to more people, so a bigger and wider audience. And a really key part of that is how we are establishing it from the very start with a gender balance lens. So every decision we make about the 100 is through that gender balance lens. So that can only be a good thing for women's cricket in terms of that scale and that thought process and what the 100 really embodies as a cricket competition. So I know, for example, that I'm really looking forward to taking my family to watch some of the matches at the 100 this summer. And I think what's really exciting about that is that, I mean, my two, they're little, so they might not really know what's going on, but they're 3 and 1 and a bit. So we'll see how that goes. Could be carnage. But what's brilliant from my perspective is that they will get to watch elite women's cricket on the same platform and scale as elite men's cricket, and that they can aspire one day to have a boy and a girl. They can aspire to play for the same team, and that they can aspire to have the same ambition and the same love of the game. And that wasn't the same for me when I was growing up. I didn't even know that there was a sort of, an elite pathway for women and girls. So in a very long-winded answer to your question, Hannah, about the 100s and sort of my role and remit within that, and how I deal with some of the scrutiny and stuff, I think I'm quite lucky that I can almost take a step back from some of that, because I know to the core that what the 100 is going to do for the women and girls game is massive. and that I've got an incredible opportunity to help shape that direction. And it's something that, I feel incredibly lucky. And I don't quite know how I manage that, but I feel incredibly lucky to be at the crux of that, because it's just mega exciting.
And just picking it up on the 100, I'm not sure if you were involved with it at the time or not, but when it was first announced, it was originally marketed as being for housewives and children. Do you think they made a bit of a mistake targeting it just those specific groups, or do you think they should have targeted it more at families?
A really good question, Alex. And I think with the origins of the 100, back then it wasn't, I don't even think it was the 100 then. I think we were still talking about it as the new T20 competition, or the new competition. It was called for quite a long time before that bombshell was dropped, so that it was going to be a new format with 100 balls. But look, I think in terms of the audience that we're going after for the 100, it is all about throwing cricket doors open to more people. And I think something that we've realised is that we have a massive opportunity around families and young people. And you mentioned it there. I think, it's not all about women and children. It is about that family experience. And it is about trying to get more young people into the game. So we know that we have a challenge as a game that our predominant audience, not the whole audience, but predominantly, it is a white male dominated audience. So what can we do to try and expand that? Because ultimately all the 100 is trying to do is to bring more people in and to grow our game. And I think, families and young people is a real key target audience for that. And I think if you look at the way that we're trying to position the 100, so yes, it is going to be a world-class cricket competition. First and foremost, it's going to feature some of the best players from around the world. So we saw last week with the men's player draft event, and that we announced 8 Australian women's players are also going to be involved across those 8 teams. So it's going to involve world-class cricket, but it's also going to fuse that with brilliant blockbuster entertainment, which sounds a bit marketing-esque and like a bit vague. What does that actually mean? But it means that we're trying to reimagine what the sort of the match day experience looks like. How can we make it more relevant and accessible to families? So I've mentioned about I'm excited about taking my family. So that means that with my 3-year-old and my 1-year-old, we need to keep them entertained all the time. And it needs to be fast, it needs to be exciting, it needs to be colourful, it needs to be vibrant, it needs to be bold. And I think they're just some of the things that with the 100 and with the new format and this new opportunity with these 8 new teams, men's and women's players, same team, same platform, we have an opportunity to look at things differently. So I think, that's can only be very exciting.
And do you think by having these high profile players in both the men and the women's game, it's going to elevate the 100 to a new status and perhaps make it a format that more people might want to take up?
Hopefully, I think, in terms of the caliber of the players who are going to be involved, we've got the big ones, definitely from the women's game perspective, sort of being able to announce Meg Lanning, Beth Mooney and Jess Jonathan all playing at Welsh Fire last week. You're kind of like, crikey, that's decent. So I think, in terms of whether the format will be picked up and played elsewhere, hopefully, I think one of the key purposes around the 100 and the format itself is it does make it simple. So I know, for example, that cricket, like I love it. I've grown up playing. I started playing when I was 10 years old. I know the nuances. I love the randomness of things that happen. And, there's really weird laws that are difficult to explain. And like, I'm in the club, so I kind of get it and I like that. But I know that it's a real challenge actually in terms of them being able to engage with somebody who's never watched a cricket match before. And I think there's a real perception challenge around what cricket is and sort of, who it's for. And I think just going back to the theme for International Women's Day and that choose to challenge, I think the big thing that really struck me straight away in terms of my personal sort of interpretation of that was we should be choosing to challenge perceptions, like choose to challenge the perception of what cricket is and who it's for. And I think the 100 really helps us to address a lot of that, because it is, it's 100 balls, whoever scores the most runs wins. And that makes it really simple to explain to somebody who has never seen a cricket match before what's going on. You don't have to talk about overs, you don't have to talk about fine leg, you don't have to talk about mid-off, mid-on, silly point, all these jargonous words that mean nothing to somebody that's never heard them before. Like, you can strip all that complexity out, just present it as a simple game between bat and ball, most runs wins. And I think sort of from a personal perspective, the example I always use here is, so my wife Eliza, like she's a massive sports nut, she loves it, she's a hockey player, back in the day, not so much anymore, having had 2 kids, but she's got into cricket because of me. Like, I've taken her to matches, we'll listen to Test Match Special on the radio when we're driving in the car, and we'll watch on Sky Sports. Like, she actually consumes a lot of cricket now, but she will still ask me the question, especially when she's just listening to the commentary and they're talking about, she's just chopped one down to third man. She'd be like, what does that mean? What are they even talking about? So I think one of the key things to the 100 is almost just trying to strip back some of that complexity, just deliver it in a really easy, accessible way. And I think one of the brilliant things that we're doing actually around the 100 is how do we integrate our broadcast partners into helping us with some of those things? So how do we use graphics? How do we use digital innovations? So there's like loads of really cool digital things that are going on. And going back to a previous question about like what could the impact be around sort of the women's game in particular, like you just look at some of the digital stuff that we're planning and you just like, I mean, it's just mind-blowing how cool it is. And in terms of, trying to inspire young girls to want to get into the game and things like that's the space we need to be in. So I've actually forgotten what the original question was here now, but there's lots of layers to the 100. Oh, we're talking about complexity and things, aren't we? Like, I think it could be a game that is adopted at the grassroots as well. So in terms of that entry level option, and not just for women, not just for girls, but for men and boys as well, that entry level option just down your local club or, you know, in your local playground or whatever, anything that makes it easy to play and to set up, I think can only be a good thing.
I definitely agree. And honestly, my like research nerd is coming out here every time you mention kind of perceptions and visibility. My PhD is obviously it's frames about the T20 World Cup last year. What I found there is obviously really exciting, but what's going to happen in the summer, I think is going to be just that next level even more. And I think that's my biggest frustration with academia is I'm focusing on a specific time period. So my findings are going to be about that time period, and it's not
going to update, Hannah.
Yeah,
something that's already yesterday's.
Literally, and it's going to be so kind of like not irrelevant, because obviously it'll be really important, but it's just not going to be able to acknowledge this new exciting time where the work has kind of moved on. Because I think we saw back along with an international survey that was conducted about professionalism in the game, and that was already 2 years out of date, and it's so slow research. But anyway, that's my little rant over.
No, but I think just to that though, I think it's so important, and this isn't me sort of blowing smoke or whatever the phrase is, I'm not sure what words I can use on this podcast, but without trying to sort of big you up here, I think it is so important that these issues and challenges are being properly researched now. I think there's a massive gap actually in some of these things that they've just not really been looked at or talked about. And, you know, maybe there's an element that historically people didn't really care. People weren't that bothered, you know, so what, like if we're not getting enough women and girls into the game or into sport, so what, who really cares? People care now, like we really care. And I think from my perspective, you know, I look back at my my academic days a long time ago now. So I did a geography degree and I'm really frustrated at myself because geography is one of those subjects where you can take it anywhere. And like I had an opportunity to do a dissertation and I could have done it on pretty much anything because that's how geography is. Cue all the jokes about colouring in and all of those things. But I did a dissertation on the spatial and temporal distribution of dust across Oxford city centre, which I remember nothing about now. It was completely pointless. I did it as a means to an end because ultimately I remember why I did it. I wanted to play cricket all summer. So I wanted something that I knew that I could just do. I could be in Oxford all summer playing cricket. I could just really concentrate on that. So I just did it. Whereas I would love now almost to be back in a position where I could do some sort of really brilliant research on women's sport. So I'm really envious actually of the opportunity that you have ahead of you, that you can look into some of these issues because write it, Hannah, and I will read it and I'll lap it up. I can't wait.
I mean, honestly, we can collab in the future, you know, get some research on the go. No, but that's what I'm most passionate about is I've realised there really isn't much on cricket. Obviously, the history of cricket, you've got Ralph Nicholson, who is excelling in that kind of space. But from a media marketing perspective, in an English context, the last study I found, and I apologise if somebody is doing loads of stuff, was 2009. So
lots changed since then. Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully my findings will add some value, but we'll see.
I think 09, just going back to 09, I think that was a real shifting year actually for the women's game, wasn't it? Because was that when we won the 50 over in the T20 Women's World Cups?
And the Ashes.
And the Ashes, gosh, can't believe I forgot that one. But I think in terms of the T20 World Cup in particular, I remember the match at the Oval where England women were playing against Australia. And I think it was a partnership, wasn't it, between Claire Taylor and Beth Morgan, maybe, to get us over the line in that game. And I think when we talk about perceptions and shifting perceptions, I remember reading quite a lot of the time, and obviously I watched it as well, of, you know, journalists, predominantly male journalists, waking up to the fact that women were actually quite good at this game. And actually, if you invest in them and you give them a stage and you give them a platform, it's actually quite a good spectacle. And it's almost that element of surprise that like, oh, this is very watchable. And I think, you look at what's happened since then and how the game has kicked on even further. And hopefully that's just what the 100 will help us to do this summer, is just really showcase how far the game has come again. And, it's just, another I guess another sort of step in the history and the evolution of women's cricket and cricket. And I think what the 100 really does, and I've talked a bit about this with colleagues recently, I think it really accelerates our ability to close the gap. So there is still a gap. We know there's still a gap. There's definitely still a gap between various elements of the men's and the women's game. But I think what the 100 does is it helps us to accelerate the closing of that gap, which is really important.
100%, and we will come on to that a little bit later as well. Just mentioning back at the 2009 World Cup, because that was the first time where I didn't realise at the time it was the World Cup. So I think I was about 14, 15, and I was down at County Ground in Taunton watching these like women's matches, and it's the first time that I'd actually seen like England women. And I found a very dodgy Facebook album the other day where I was taking lots of photos thinking I must have been like an amazing sports photographer, and half of them are blurred and it's so off and everything. But I guess that's where my media passion did stem from. But I just wanted to take it back to that point, because 2009 was obviously, like you mentioned, a turning point, and prior to that 1993 and 1973 and all of the kind of years in between. So what other kind of turning points do you think there have been, if you can like nail it? When was the first time that you personally as well saw women playing cricket?
Gosh, that's an excellent question. So from a personal perspective, when did I really realise the women's game existed? Well, I know, so I started playing cricket probably when I was around 8 or 9 down at my local club. So I was very fortunate. My local primary school has a very good relationship with the local cricket club. I was a bit of a tomboy, so I was playing football in the playground in the winters, and they all went off to play cricket in the summer. So kind of, followed them down to the club and got amongst it there. But classic story, as I'm sure is the case with pretty much every woman of my generation, is that I was the only girl in the local club, changing the ladies' toilets and all of those things. And my natural assumption, therefore, when I was dreaming about playing for England one day, was that I would be captain of the England men's team, because that was the only team I thought existed. And I had a bit of an obsession with Mike Atherton, and I've been doing so I've moved house recently, done the classic pandemic, needed more space, so we moved out to the countryside, and so I've had to clear through lots of stuff. And my dad's had me up in the loft in his house, because I was still housing quite a lot of stuff there, and found this box full of like old sort of schoolwork, sketches, bits and pieces, and I'd done a sketch of Michael Atherton's face. I was that obsessed with him. Like, that's a bit weird, isn't it? So I genuinely thought that I'd play for the men's team and hopefully would make my debut there. So obviously that didn't quite happen. But I think in terms of the women's game, I guess I was quite fortunate, because I was fairly handy. So I was part of sort of the Essex girls county age group set up from when I was probably sort of 12, 13 or so, played through sort of those county age groups, and Essex looked after me brilliantly. So I was the first girl to be selected onto the Essex Cricket Academy in the year that was launched. So I was in the cohort with Sir Alistair Cook. There's a bit of a name drop there, but me and Cookie signing up for the Essex Cricket Academy back in, I don't even know what year that would have been, probably around 2001, 2 or something like that. But I was exposed, I suppose, through that pathway to the Essex women's team. And then I played Super Fours. So that was kind of the competition back in the day that was used as the bridging gap, I suppose, between domestic women's cricket and international women's cricket. So it meant from quite a young age I was playing with the likes of Charlotte Edwards. So she was my club captain when I started playing women's club cricket down at Kent Invicta. And obviously working for the ECB now, I report into Claire Connor. So we often have a bit of a chuckle about how we used to play against each other back in the glory days. But when I was going through this box, when I was going through this box, alongside my sketch of Mike Atherton, I also had loads of pristinely kept posters of England women's bilateral series and stuff. So and I remember now, like, I used to have these up on my wall in my room. So I would have a poster of Claire Connor up in my room on my wall. So I'm pleased to say that's not the case anymore, because that would be a bit odd. But so I think I did have female role models. I think I did obviously look up to the likes of Claire and Charlotte and others in the game. But the profile just wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere near what it is today. So in terms of having that tangible ambition to play for the England women's team, that was probably quite late. That's probably sort of, 15, 16, I suppose, when the penny drops that I wouldn't be playing for the men and I'd be playing for the women. But in terms of, so I'm just trying to think other game-changing moments. I mean, I think there's been lots. You two will probably be much more clued up on the kind of the history elements of it, but I think there's been lots fairly recently. So I think the 2013 Women's Ashes, I think that's right. I think that was a big moment. I think that's probably around the time that Sky probably started televising every one of the England women's matches live, which is again a big shift and a big commitment from them. But I mean, we're still really only just sort of scratching the surface there. I think, in the most recent history, that Women's T20 World Cup final last March, that's the biggest probably standout moment in recent times. Just a phenomenal achievement to sort of deliver that World Cup final there, and the numbers that went to watch it. But I'm trying to think, maybe what you two got? What are your big moments? Come on, hit me with your top 5 big game-changing moments in women's cricket.
I think for me is purely 2009 massively. Yeah. Obviously, if we're going back in time, then obviously Rachel Heo-Flynn and getting the first ever World Cup obviously on the ball. But I think recent history for me has got to be, obviously, which you were a part of, is 2017 World Cup. What a game changer.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, that absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, in this country, that 2017 Women's World Cup is a moment that will stand out. So I was, as you've alluded to there, Hannah, I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to work on that. So I was a strategic planning manager, which I'm still not completely sure what that job title really entailed. But how I interpreted it was that I was essentially a bit of a consultant across lots of different areas. So I kind of, I was able to advise on things around sort of, player logistics and operations, but then also event presentation, marketing, comms, etc. So it was quite a nice role, actually. I kind of got to dip into lots of different bits without having any overarching responsibilities. So it was perfect. But I remember back, there are several key moments within that. So just in terms of how we positioned it from the start. So we did a ballot for the final. So I don't think we'd ever had a ballot for a major women's sport event in this country before. So I think that's the first time that had happened. And, that happened back in kind of October 2016 or something. I think it happened sort of, pre-Christmas. I'm probably going to be proven wrong with that now, but I have a feeling it was was it? Maybe it was the year off. But anyway, it was a good few months out from the competition starting. And I think just what that did straight away was it just signposts value and it signposts scarcity. So it's like, you need to get yourself in this ballot. If you want to come and watch this amazing World Cup on home soil at Lord's, the home of cricket, you need to get your name in the hat now. So you need to apply and get into the ballot. So I think that's the first thing we did. I think we did lots of other really good tactical bits and pieces around sort of how the ticketing on sale and how we approach that. Again, just bringing that level of professionalism that hadn't happened really in the women's game before. So really having a plan, having a proper marketing and comms plan. And so that was, it's led by a former colleague, Zara Al-Qudsi, who's now a commercial partnerships manager at F1, passionate about women's sport, sits on the Women's Sport Trust board. But she was the real driving force behind that. And I think, I remember having conversations with her fairly early on where we talked about, we're going to sell out the final, regardless of whether England are in it or not, we're going to sell it out. We're going to get 28,000 people there because it's a World Cup. It's not just a bilateral series, it's a World Cup. And if we can't sell a World Cup out, then, we're doing something wrong. So we were bold and ambitious with it. I remember going into some meetings and quite frankly, with some stakeholders, they dismissed it, shrug of shoulders, being like, okay, that's all right. Nice ambition, girls, but let's maybe just see how we go. Let's see how ticket sales go before we commit to opening the whole ground. Let's try not bite off too much here. Let's start small. And I'm really pleased that we were bold and we were ambitious and we pushed through with that. And obviously the results show for themselves. But I think what people don't realise about that World Cup, actually, I think people think that we sold it out because England got there, and the only reason we sold it out is because it was an England team playing in a home World Cup on home soil. That's not the case. We'd actually sold it out before the semi-finals, and I don't think people realise that. So we'd actually, we'd sold that World Cup out before England qualified for the final. So that was, an enormous thing in itself. And then the day itself, I mean, gosh, I've never experienced anything like it. So I've worked at Lord's for about 10 years now in various roles. Initially used to work for the MCC in their media and comms team. So very used to being around the ground on a major match day. I used to manage the media centre. So yeah, very used to kind of seeing full houses, watching men's cricket at Lords and sort of the buzz and the feel around it. But that day in 2017, it just had a completely different feel to it. It was a different noise. Everything about it was different. And I just remember even just on the morning, like the queues snaking all the way back to St John's Wood Tube Station, like just unbelievable. And there were ticket touts. Outside the ground, there were ticket touts, you know, and that's never happened before, well, at least as far as I'm aware, around a major women's sport event in this country. So I think, look, the whole day was magical. It was, yeah, something that will live long with me forever. It gave me a lot of belief, actually, that we were going in the right direction. And I think just going back to the point about how it had a different feel to it, like there's an amazing stat that more cups of coffee were sold that day than pints of beer. And I think that's a really interesting thing, actually, because I think that just demonstrates that actually, whilst, you know, we have the same level of ambition around the women's game as the men's game, and we want it to be as big and scale and all of those things, it is still different, and that's okay. And it does appeal maybe to a slightly different audience, and I think that's okay. And I think that's actually where it's really interesting with the 100. So coming back to that, you'll notice that I do this a lot, by the way, just keep bringing everything back to the 100. But coming back to the 100 and sort of the purpose that the women's competition serves within that overarching ambition for the 100, which is all about throwing cricket stores open to more people, the women's competition is really vital within that, because I think it just signposts that cricket is a game for everyone. And I think it really will help us to hopefully engage with this more diverse audience, and will attract more families and young people to the game, because that's exactly what happened on that Women's World Cup final day back in 2017.
And you are obviously a proud mother to two beautiful little kids. How challenging has it been to be a working mother and the head of the 100?
That's very kind of you to say two beautiful children. I mean, I think they're beautiful, but they're kids. They can be a little bit, messy and mucky a lot of the time as well. It's been interesting, actually, and I think this is where, like, with the last year and with the pandemic and everything that's resulted in terms of working from home, I think I'm coming up to my year anniversary, actually, of working from home, which it's had its challenges in terms of space and being able to really segregate sort of that work-life balance. But I think the real silver lining of it, actually, is the amount of time I've been able to have spending with Eliza, my wife, and my kids, so Eden and Ben. And, you know, just the fact that every morning I get to wake them up in the morning and get them dressed and everything, and then every evening, like, it's story time and having that time with them, like, it's really precious. And I kind of reflect and I'm like, if this year hadn't happened with the pandemic, would I have had that time with them? I wouldn't have. Like, and, you know, I think things would be a lot more hectic and possibly a lot more difficult. And I think just over the last year, it's almost given me personally a chance to sort of really reflect on that and really reassess what's important. And hopefully when things do go back to whatever the new normal ends up looking like, and, you know, I'm having to get back into the office. I mentioned I moved house, so I now have quite a long commute, that I can still maintain that balance and that I can still make sure that I'm around for Eden and Ben as much as I want to be. So I think there's a few things there. And I think the other thing, though, that it has done definitely for me is it's given me a really good perspective on things, a really good kind of leveler about what's really important. And it's made me realize that, you can have a difficult day at work where things happen, you know, like I remember sort of the day that we decided last year that the 100 wasn't going to be able to go ahead, definitely the right decision, but that was heartbreaking. And sort of being able to process that by just going and having a cuddle with Eden, and she's like, "It's okay, Mama. It'll be fine, Mama." You know, it really just makes it okay. She's right. It will be okay. Everything will be what it is. So I think it's given me that perspective. And then just from a professional capacity, like, it's given me probably a renewed drive and a renewed energy about what I'm trying to achieve. So from my perspective, you know, we all have visions and mission statements and ambitions and objectives and all of those things. But my personal, I guess, vision for what cricket is and what I'm trying to do, especially with my role on the 100, is that I want cricket to be equally relevant, accessible to Eden and Ben. So it's not just a sport that is, you know, primarily for Ben and that Eden can play if she wants to, but her pathway is a little bit more complicated and there are a few more barriers that she has to get through. And, oh, by the way, Eden, you're probably going to be the only girl at this session. Like, I want them to have an equal accessible and relevant experience. So I think it's selfishly, like, they've done me a bit of a favor there, because I think it's really helped me to kind of really align my personal and professional values there.
Earlier, you mentioned that you grew up playing cricket and that Michael Atherton was someone that you admired. Did you have any other role models, or was it just Michael Atherton?
No, I did. I don't want this to come out as some sort of weird Michael Atherton stalker or something. No, I also I watched a lot of tennis, so because that was on free to air television. So I'd watched a lot of Wimbledon in particular. When I say tennis, I just think Wimbledon. So I know that I used to have posters of Steffi Graf. So she was the one that I really admired. I think I quite liked, she used to wear like a headband, like a bandana, like I quite liked that look. There was, I guess she was one. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't think I ever went through the, I don't know, sort of real kind of, that noticing or thinking I've got role models. I think it was almost, just got on with it and played it really. And maybe actually it's that I had very, very local role models that I looked up to, and that, I wanted to be like. So I also played a lot of hockey growing up, and probably actually hockey was probably my main sport for initially. That was the one that I played. So it's actually probably the England women's hockey team. So sort of Jane Sixsmith, Jane Smith, and sort of, those players that I probably wanted to emulate more. And maybe that was because they were more visible. Maybe that is it. Maybe it's because hockey is much more naturally a gender balanced sport. You know, hockey is kind of, if anything, it's probably, especially with off the back of the Rio Olympics, you know, it's probably a sport that people akin to women more than they do to men, albeit it does have that gender balance at its heart. So maybe that's it. Maybe sort of predominantly role models through sort of the hockey space rather than the cricket space, just because they were more visible at the time.
And then just linking back to leadership as well. So obviously women historically have kind of been excluded from boards, and the whole idea of sport as a male domain needs to kind of be challenged now as well, because obviously there is a place at the table for women. So how did you get into your leadership positions, and have you had to overcome any kind of barriers or challenges?
Great question. Do you know, it's a really interesting one, because I think I perhaps have been fortunate that I've not noticed that I've had hurdles to overcome. I think I've been quite lucky, I suppose, with my career, that I've had good opportunities have kind of arisen at the right time for me. I wonder whether, though, there is an element that I was so used to as a child growing up in, you know, playing cricket and being part of that predominantly male space, you know, only girl at my local club, join the Essex Cricket Academy, selected onto that. Like, I would be the only girl on that Essex Cricket Academy with, you know, the likes of Alistair Cook, Ravi Bopara, Tom Wesley. Like, they were my cohort. So I'm mixing with them all the time. So, like, I don't know, maybe I just got kind of used to the fact that that was just as it was. And then I was very fortunate that I got into Oxford. So I went to Oxford and did my undergrad there. And I think I always felt very empowered. I think I've always been very fortunate that through sort of opportunities, whether in sport or academic stuff, I've always had people who have really empowered me to sort of get on with things. So my tutors at university, so I had two, primarily Lorraine Wild and Heather Viles, and they were very supportive, and, you know, I never saw anything as sort of a barrier or a challenge. So it's kind of, I think I've been quite lucky in that respect. I do appreciate that's not the same for everyone. And then I think just in terms of sort of professional career wise, like, you know, I say I've been lucky, but I've worked incredibly hard as well. Like, I've made sure that I've been in the right places at the right times. So, well, my first job out of uni, so I was the Sports Federation president for Oxford for a year, which was brilliant, because that basically meant that I got to stay on at Oxford for a year, organise a bit of sport. There's a bit more to it than that, but essentially live a bit like a student, but I was being paid and I didn't have any exams. So that was amazing. But then after that, I joined Rounders England as a regional development officer for Rounders England, which was a bit of a rogue move. And I think I remember my parents being like, are you sure that's what you want to do? Like, all your friends are, you know, off becoming investment bankers and consultants and doctors and things, and you're going to be running Rounders. Like, what's that all about? But I think I could always see it as a stepping stone. I was like, no, I want to work in sport. I need to get into the sector. I don't know how the sector works. I need to learn. And I think I was given quite a lot of responsibility fairly early on with that, because it was a small organisation. So I was able to have like quite a good impact there, and I was able to be exposed to environments where I was presenting to Sport England or sort of getting involved at a fairly high level there. And then, yeah, moving into cricket, like working for MCC for 3 years, it is possibly the most male-dominated organisation and environment in the world. It is changing. There is a big shift happening there. I think the appointment of Claire Connor, obviously, as president next year there just shows how intent they are on changing that persona and that perception. So back to perception about what the club is all about. So things are changing there. But I think working at MCC, again, like I almost felt a little bit, being the only woman in the room, I saw it as an advantage. I saw it as having a point of difference. I saw it as having a platform to be able to sort of bring a different opinion. But I do appreciate that it was also quite difficult, and it did mean you had to be quite outspoken, and that has to change. That absolutely has to change. Like, we need diversity of thought. We need greater representation. Like, I think I mentioned it at the start, like, we've come such a long way as a sport and as a game, but there are still some big challenges. And I think governance and making sure that we have, that we have informed women in the room making decisions about women's cricket is really important. So I think since working at ECB, I've been very fortunate to have a very close working relationship with Claire Connor, who has been the real driving force behind pretty much every major thing that's happened in women's cricket in this country, definitely over the last sort of 10 years or so. So yeah, I think I think things are changing. I think things need to change more quickly, ideally. I think it is, governance is crucial. We need the right people in the room making those decisions, and we need that diversity of thought.
Completely agree. And we've got obviously the announcement of Charlotte Edwards as the PC.
Of course, Lottie. And that's it. And I think I saw a tweet about that, actually. Lottie was that first wave of professional female players in 2014, and that's not that long ago, right? Like, that was when I was working at ECB, so I was media manager for the women's team there, and I remember writing that press release to announce this first wave of professional England women's contracts, and Lottie was one of the recipients within that. So to see her now being elected as president of the Professional Cricketers Association, there's something really nice about that, to demonstrate how far the women's game has come just in that 6 or 7 years. And I think having Lottie in that role, I think, again, it just shows that as a game, we are trying to open up properly. We are trying to address the imbalances that are still there. Like I said, there's still lots to do, but I think having the right people helping to guide those this time and those decisions is crucial. So I'm absolutely thrilled. Lottie and Claire sort of at top of the tree, which is great.
And then in Scotland as well, we've got Sue Strachan, who's the first ever female president there. So all of these firsts are happening, maybe perhaps later than we wanted them to, but they are happening. So the future is definitely going in the right direction, we hope. And as a leader yourself, so one thing I've just noted down here is how accessible you are and how open you are. Like, this conversation has been so quite relaxed, quite chilled, and it's so nice to see you talking so openly about your leadership role. And I think we've noticed that with quite a few of the women that we've interviewed, is perhaps we get a kind of perception of like, oh my God, they're incredible women, they're so far away from who we are, and kind of like untouchable, kind of, if that makes sense. But you know what I mean, I guess, for especially younger girls and stuff as well, who are like, oh, I'd love to work in cricket one day. How important do you think it is to actually be accessible, to do like podcasts like these, and to have your profile on Twitter so open?
Hugely. I think, everybody talks about you can't be what you can't see. I think there's also an element of, you can't be what you can't relate to. So I think it is about being relatable. And I think it is about being a human. I think ultimately, we're all in this together. And I think the more open we can be about talking about challenges or ambitions or personal stories, etc., just the more real things are. So I mean, hopefully that does come across, because I would be more than happy to talk to anybody about my role and about my journey. And God, it sounds like some sort of X Factor backstory, which it isn't at all. But I think that accessibility point is really important. And I think that, like I said, I think with, I don't know, it's a bit tongue in cheek, but with how I'm trying to use Twitter more these days to communicate, I think that's really important, because I think ultimately, there will be frustrations about what's going on in the game, and there will be things that people disagree with, and there will be decisions that are made that people don't understand. But unless we take the time to explain some of those things and to explain where we are, then how can we expect people just to accept them? So I think it is about being accessible. I think I sometimes get a sort of rap on the knuckles from our comms team about being too open. But look, I would much rather have an honest conversation, because otherwise I'm going to forget what I can and can't say. So yeah, it's best just to be honest about everything, really.
And just bringing it back to the 100, it's great that it was announced that the prize money is equal, but wages between men and women still aren't. What more do you think needs to be done to ensure that equality is reached?
Yeah, I'm really pleased you asked that question, actually, because I've kind of alluded to it a few times in this conversation about how there are still big gaping gaps, and that pay disparity is one of them, right? That is probably the single biggest thing that we can point at, where there is a big difference between what the men's players are being paid in the 100 and what the women's players are being paid. So I think it's around 15%. The women will earn around 15% what the men earn. And I think we've always been very open about that. We've not tried to hide it. We've not tried to pretend that it's closer than it is. But I think with regards to sort of prize money and pay, I think they're two very different things, actually. I think prize money is a real, it's very totemic. It is a real signal around how much you value something. So I think by having equal prize money for the men's and the women's competitions, that was really important. And that was a key decision that we made. That was actually a very simple decision in the end, because it was all about what does the 100 stand for? And the 100 stands for trying to put gender balance at its core. So we need to make sure that we are valuing the winners of the men's competition exactly the same as the winners of the women's competition. So that was a very easy decision. Now, pay is a bit more complicated. And I think with regards to pay, I think we do have to just take a step back and just, again, look at the journey that the women's game is on. So I've already mentioned there that I remember writing that press release for the first wave of professional female cricketers in 2014 with the England women's team. And if you look at all the brilliant things that have happened since then, over the last 6 years or so, we're on this accelerated journey, but there is still a way to go. So I think it's kind of how can we over the next 5 or 6 years accelerate the closing of that gap? And I think the 100 is part of the solution, not the problem to this. So if you look at why that gap exists, there's lots of things around it. But one of the key things I think is around how we market women's cricket. So we need the women's game to flip from being, and this is a bit of a jargonous sort of way of talking about it, but from being a cost centre, so from costing the game money, which it does at the moment, like playing international women's cricket and playing domestic women's cricket, it costs the game money and we don't have that return on investment yet. So how do we flip it from being a cost centre to a revenue generator so that it does start making money, so it becomes commercially sustainable, and then we can start looking at that equal pay debate with a lot more vigor. And I think there are several sort of things around that. So like revenue, it's all about broadcast income, ticket sales and commercial partners. And I think what the 100 does is by co-presenting the men's and the women's game, it helps to reposition some of those things. And I think just in terms of that marketing element in particular, like the level of investment going into marketing this year around the 100 is bigger than anything we've ever seen before in women's cricket. So being able to really give that visibility and that scale and that showcase moment. So on the 21st of July, when we have that standalone opening women's match, which, you know, we've got high ambitions for how many tickets we want to sell to that game. Obviously, it depends on government COVID regulations, but, you know, we want to get big attendance. We want to get big audience figures on TV and stuff. And then all of a sudden, you know, you've got a product there that people want to invest in. So then it's like, yeah, how do we keep evolving? How do we keep building? We know that we have a challenge there. We're very open to that. We're not trying to shy away from it. But it's like, where can we be in 5 years' time so that that gap has had, you know, that it has closed as much as possible? So I think it's one of those, like, I think about it all the time. It's one of those things, you know, one of the big sort of questions that I'm thinking about a lot is, the commerciality of the women's game and how we make that shift and that step change. And I think that's the next big thing that we need to address, really. And hopefully, like I said, the 100 will be part of the solution to that.
And what you've just said has really hit the nail on the head. Do you think that's part of the reason why the women's game doesn't get as much respect as the men's?
Yeah, I think, I think there's probably a few things that play there. I think maybe people dismiss it without having actually seen it. I think there's maybe just a bit of a kind of, it's just, women's sport is just not as good as men's sport without actually having watched it. So hopefully through the broadcast deal that we've got this year with the 100 and through playing all of those matches alongside the men's matches, that visibility will really help to educate how good the women's game is now. I think, we saw it back in 2009. If you put something in front of people and they'll watch it, they'll be like, wow, that's actually really good. So the more of that we can do, the better. And look, I think, we're always going to have a challenge around people making a direct comparison between the men's game and the women's game, which I actually think is a bit lazy. We know that they are different. We know that biologically, women, we're not as strong. We're not going to be able to bowl as quick as the men. We're not going to be able to hit the ball as far as the men. Although I say that, if you see some of the sixes that are being hit now, I think that would help to change perceptions. So in terms of that, going back to choose the challenge and perceptions, that's a massive shift we need to make, actually. So how can we change the perception around women's cricket? And I think hopefully through the 100 and through the England Women's Internationals this summer and that increased scale and visibility, we will start shifting some of those perceptions about the women's game and about women's cricket and women's sport more generally.
And I think that is a perfect place to kind of round up now as well. And like Alex said, you hit the nail on the head. And what I like to say is it's different to, not lesser than.
Yes. Yeah.
I think people just miss that mark massively. They don't engage with it. They just comment on social media saying, this is village, get back to the kitchen. Oh my God, this is boring. So for the 2017 World Cup, my dissertation was looking at online misogyny and the comments that were made to the news coverage on the coverage of the final. And all of the comments are horrendous. So it's like, even when England win the World Cup, they still get lazy, misogynistic kind of comments. But that's a minority.
I think more and more people are calling that out, right? And I think that's it. And I think this whole Choose to Challenge theme that we're all going to celebrate for International Women's Day, it's a real opportunity actually for individuals. And that's why I quite like it as a theme. I think it's very action orientated. And it means that as individuals, we can choose to challenge some of those behaviours and choose to challenge some of those comments. Because you're right, I like what you said there about, what is it? It's not less than, it's different.
It's not lesser than, it's different too.
Yeah, see, I love that. That's it. Exactly. It's by no means a lesser than product. It's just different, and that's fine. Like, it can be just as good as. So yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
So Beth, where can our listeners find you on social media to find out more about you and about the 100 and how many days and what's going on and all that wonderful stuff?
So 2 key channels for you. So my personal Twitter is at BethWild7, and I am becoming increasingly interactive with that. So lots of good news there. And then with regards to the 100, it's at the 100. So nice and simple. Don't follow at oppose the 100. That's not a good one.
Yeah, hashtag oppose the 100 and
no.
Honestly, a huge thank you, because we appreciate it's time out of your day as well, and you've got to get back to getting the 100.
Yeah, I've got to actually do something now. No, it's good practice for me, actually. I need to do more things like this. So no, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Honestly, it's an absolute privilege, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.
Massive thank you to Beth for coming on and being our 6th guest for International Women's Week. It's really interesting to see how the 100 was formed and how it's progressing and how it's only going to have a positive impact on cricket and not a negative one. Coming up tomorrow on our 7th and final podcast for International Women's Week, we've got the Scotland President, Sue Strachan. Now, Sue talks all about her journey from being a doctor to getting to the presidency. And to all our listeners, if you want to keep up to date with everything we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter at WCricketChat and on Instagram at Women's Cricket Chat. And if you want to give us a like on Facebook, we are Women's Cricket Chat. And if you wanted to give our personal Twitters a follow, Hannah is at HannahT1194 and I'm at Alex Jane Pereira. This has been Women's Cricket Chat. Tune in next time.